When the Gazala line was abandoned in mid-June 1942, Tobruk did not move with the retreating army. It remained behind, a port, a fortress, a symbol, and now a problem that could no longer be separated from the defeat in the open desert. The British Eighth Army was pulling eastward after weeks of failed counterattacks, armored losses, and growing Axis pressure. Rommel had broken the mobile shield that had been meant to protect the line, and once that shield withdrew, Tobruk stood exposed in the rear of a collapsing battlefield. This is why Tobruk's fate cannot be understood as a separate siege story. The fortress was left behind because the field army around it had lost control. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. Tobruk already carried enormous meaning in the Desert War. In 1941, it had endured a long siege and become a symbol of Allied resistance, a place that seemed to prove Rommel could be stopped even in the middle of Axis success. That earlier defense created a powerful memory, but memory can be dangerous when conditions change. The Tobruk of 1942 did not stand in the same situation as the Tobruk of the previous year. The garrison, preparations, wider battlefield, and state of the field army were all different. A fortress that once represented stubborn endurance could become a trap if the mobile forces around it were no longer able to shape the campaign. The retreat from Gazala was not a clean withdrawal into safety. It was a difficult movement by an army that had been battered and disorganized by weeks of fighting. Units had to disengage, move east, protect supply columns, evacuate wounded men, recover what vehicles they could, and avoid being cut off by Axis pressure. Some formations still had to fight while others moved. Roads, tracks, dust, fuel shortages, and confusion all shaped the withdrawal. In such circumstances, commanders were not simply choosing positions on a map. They were trying to preserve an army under pressure, and every decision about Tobruk had to be made while the larger front was already bending backward. The central issue was that a fortress and a field army are never truly independent. A fortress can have walls, guns, supplies, and a garrison, but its survival depends on the operational situation around it. If a friendly army controls the approaches, the fortress can serve as a base, port, supply center, and defensive anchor. If that army retreats and the enemy controls the surrounding movement, the same fortress can become isolated. Tobruk's danger came from this change in relationship. It was not suddenly weak because its name had changed. It became vulnerable because the British army that should have kept Rommel away from it could no longer do so. The British had reasons for wanting Tobruk held. The port mattered in the logistics of North Africa because every useful harbor shortened the overland haul that consumed trucks, fuel, and time. Its capture by the Axis would give Rommel a potential supply advantage and deny the British a valuable base. Tobruk also mattered politically and psychologically. It had become one of the famous names of the Desert War, and abandoning it without a fight seemed difficult to accept. But strategic value can become strategic danger. A place worth holding is not always a place that can be held, and that question became urgent as the Eighth Army moved east. The garrison left in Tobruk was placed under Major General Hendrik Klopper, a South African commander, and included South African, British, Indian, and other Allied troops. These men were not being asked to defend an empty symbol. They were being asked to hold a real position with real military importance under deeply difficult conditions. Yet the defenses were not simply a repeat of the earlier siege, and the garrison did not have unlimited time to prepare for a major attack. Some works existed, some supplies were present, and the perimeter still had military value, but the wider situation had changed fast. Tobruk was being asked to become a fortress again, while the battle around it had already turned against the Allies. The retreat also created a dangerous flow of movement around the port. Units withdrawing from Gazala had to pass eastward, some through or near Tobruk, while others continued toward the Egyptian frontier. Equipment, supply dumps, transport, headquarters, wounded men, and scattered formations all had to be managed during a campaign crisis. Such movement can easily create the impression of activity without producing real defensive coherence. A port crowded with stores and units is not automatically ready for a siege. A garrison needs clear command, prepared positions, mobile reserves, communications, anti-tank defenses, artillery plans, and a shared understanding of what it is expected to do when the enemy arrives. Rommel's position was still not free of strain, but he now had momentum. His forces had fought through the cauldron, survived British attempts to destroy them, forced the abandonment of Gazala, and pushed the Eighth Army into retreat. Axis troops were tired, vehicles were worn, and supply still mattered at every step. But initiative gave Rommel choices. He could decide where to press next, and Tobruk presented both a prize and an opportunity. If he could take it quickly, he would not only remove a threat in his rear, but also gain the kind of victory that would echo far beyond the immediate battlefield. For Tobruk, speed was the enemy. A fortress usually wants time. Time to organize, repair, lay mines, coordinate artillery, distribute supplies, prepare obstacles, clarify command relationships, and settle troops into a defensive scheme. Rommel's advance threatened to deny that time. The collapse of the Gazala position meant Tobruk could not prepare in calm isolation. It had to receive retreating elements, sort out defenses, and brace for attack, while the Axis army was already closing the distance. The fortress was not facing a theoretical siege in the future. It was facing a rapidly approaching enemy who understood that delay might give the defenders a better chance. The situation also revealed the limits of symbolism in war. Tobruk's name inspired confidence because of what had happened there before, but past endurance does not guarantee future endurance. A defensive legend can encourage troops and stiffen political will, but it can also make commanders underestimate how much the conditions have changed. In 1942, Tobruk was no longer protected by a successful forward battle. It was being left behind after a defeat. That does not dishonor the men ordered to hold it. It simply recognizes that soldiers inside a fortress inherit the consequences of decisions and battles fought far beyond the perimeter. The fall of a field army and the fate of a fortress are linked by logistics as much as tactics. Tobruk contained stores that Rommel badly needed, and the possibility of those stores falling intact made the situation even more serious. Fuel, food, vehicles, ammunition, and port facilities could transform a battlefield victory into a deeper operational gain. The same supplies that made Tobruk worth holding also made it a dangerous prize if the defense failed. This is one of the cruel calculations of the Desert War. A supply base that supports your army today can strengthen the enemy tomorrow if it is captured before it can be evacuated or destroyed. For armored warfare, Tobruk's isolation teaches a lesson that reaches beyond North Africa. Tanks and mobile forces do not merely win battles in the open, they protect the meaning of fixed positions. A fortress, port, or defensive box depends on the ability of friendly mobile forces to keep the enemy from concentrating against it on favorable terms. Once those mobile forces are defeated or pulled away, the fixed position must either be relieved, evacuated, or left to face the enemy alone. Gazala broke the mobile shield. Tobruk was left to bear the consequence. That is why the story of the fortress begins before the first Axis assault reaches its perimeter. Tobruk Left Behind was not yet Tobruk fallen, but the direction of the campaign had become ominous. The Eighth Army was retreating eastward, Rommel was pressing forward, and the fortress stood in the rear, with its reputation now heavier than its defenses could comfortably carry. The next question was whether Tobruk could become again what it had been in 1941, a stubborn obstacle that stopped the Axis and held until relief came. But the circumstances were different, the field army was different, and Rommel was moving with a sense that the moment had to be exploited quickly. Gazala had failed in the open desert, and now its failure was gathering around Tobruk's perimeter.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.